Okay, well, it looks like we have a set number of participants here, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Tiffany, I don't know if there's any introductions you would like to do, or if you want me just to go straight into it. Okay, well, I will just start going into it. My name is Adam Barrett. I'm a resilience planner with the Port of San Francisco. I'm the Deputy Program Manager for Planning for the Waterfront Resilience Program. Thank you, everyone, for joining our contracting open house today and our discussion on the Waterfront Resilience Program. For your information, this presentation is being recorded, and I'm going to go through a few slides about the port in general, and then I'm going to speak through the Waterfront Resilience Program. Can everyone see the screen? If you can't, please put in the chat. So the Port of San Francisco, it manages the San Francisco waterfront. It's a gateway to a world-class city, has a diverse portfolio of maritime, recreational, and economic activities that happen here. And our vision is to deliver a vibrant and diverse waterfront for the city of San Francisco and everyone who lives, works, or visits here. Here's a visual graphic of the Port of San Francisco, the geography that it covers from Bayview all the way to the north of Fisherman's Wharf. Includes a variety of features and land uses and activity types along the way. There's a diverse maritime portfolio. There's cargo shipping, cruise, ferries, recreational boats, water taxis, the fishing fleet, and other water-dependent activities. That's our sort of water side of the house. There's also leasing and land uses on the piers and some inland lots that have a variety of commercial, entertainment, civic activities that complement the working waterfront. Some of these are, maritime industrial in nature. Others are more kind of visitor oriented. And then there's a lot of significant open space and accessible waterfront up and down the port. This is Heron's Head Park in the southern part of the port. There are promenades like the Embarcadero Promenade, neighborhood scale parks like Crane Cove Park, and then public spaces and plazas along the way. So it's a diverse port. You may have been in other sessions and seen those slides before. But how can you connect with us? You can see the websites on this slide, or you can scan the QR code, excuse me, to find out more. So I'm just going to hold on this slide for just a moment so people can scan that if they want to. Okay, with that, I'm going to move on and talk a bit about the Waterfront Resilience Program. As I mentioned, I'm the Deputy Program Manager for Planning for the program. We have our program director, and we also have an engineering wing as well. I'm going to speak through some of both here. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of the Waterfront Resilience Program, or WRP. I'm going to talk a bit about the work that's been done to date, and then focus more on our current and upcoming work along two threads: the Embarcadero early projects and our development of waterfront-wide adaptation strategies. And then we will have time for questions and answers at the end. So the Waterfront Resilience Program, the purpose, goal, and vision is to ensure that the waterfront and its assets are resilient in the face of climate and other natural hazards. That includes earthquakes, flooding, sea level rise, and other impacts due to climate change, such as shoreline erosion, flooding from other sources, such as groundwater or stormwater. We're trying to make a more resilient waterfront overall while protecting kind of all the values and wonderful things about the waterfront today. This is part of the city's Climate SF initiative that works towards a climate resilient San Francisco. This is really a framing of all of the different climate programs that the city has, both in terms of climate mitigation, which is helping to reduce and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions, and on the climate adaptation side, which is making the city more resilient to coming climate hazards and those that we are already seeing today. Again, here's the map that kind of shows the extent of what the Waterfront Resilience Program focuses on. It is equivalent to the forest jurisdiction, but it's also really protecting a lot of lands that go inland that are vulnerable to flooding. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done to date in the program. Program has existed since I think 2018. I only joined last November myself. 2017, there was a bond, the Prop A bond that passed that provided funding to build seismic strengthening projects and early projects along the Embarcadero. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the early projects. This is building off the San Francisco Sea Level Rise Action Plan, which was published in 2016, which set out a map kind of based on the regional adapting to rising tides approach about how we would adapt and make our waterfront more resilient to sea level rise. And so we've done a number of the steps, and we're here at the phase of developing adaptation plan. And in fact, with some of the early projects, we're actually into implementing some of the adaptation, although those are really focused mostly on seismic strengthening. There are a number of products that we've done to date, understanding the science and developing sea level rise projections. These are constantly, not constantly, but these are frequently updated. For example, there's been new federal sea level rise guidance that came out just last month. The city conducted and completed a vulnerability and consequences assessment, and then the port did a detailed multi-hazard risk assessment that assessed the Embarcadero's vulnerability and risk associated with potential damages from seismic and flooding events. We've done kind of studies around types of adaptation measures that can help adapt both seismically and flood protection the waterfront, and some studies of kind of how any adaptation would impact kind of the public realm, public experience of the waterfront. And there have been kind of adaptation studies, notably the Islayas Creek adaptation strategy, which you can see a kind of the cover to the report there, which was a multi-year stakeholder effort for the Islayas Creek area to develop adaptation strategies. And of course, we've conducted public engagement throughout. There's been a significant and robust and inclusive public engagement throughout the life of the program. It's still ongoing today, and we'll be doing considerably more as we work through development of adaptation alternatives and specific projects. And these are some of the high-level themes that we heard coming out of the public engagement: to focus on life safety, focus on emergency response, prioritize those assets that are most loved by the community. These can really range, but we've heard, for example, how much people value the ferry building, but also can be neighborhood parks, promenades, walking paths, etc. And then really to put people and safety first. And these are just some of the sort of high level themes. We've heard a lot more detail about what assets people care about and things like that as well. Here's just some of the information that comes out of the multi-hazard risk assessment and our overall kind of sea level rise vulnerability work. So you can see where the seismic risks, this was studied for the length of the Embarcadero there, where they're strongest, as well as the sea level rise vulnerability zone, up to 7 feet of sea level rise, which is sort of projected for 2100. And you can see where the kind of lower levels are in the darker purplish color, and moving inland as tides continue to rise. Here's a little bit more of a detailed snapshot of the Embarcadero, and in particular the seismic impacts that were found through the multi-hazard risk analysis. Sort of highest risk area was found was in the ferry building area, where it's subject to liquefaction and seawall instability that could lead to kind of lateral spreading or kind of a sloughing off of the seawall and damage buildings and infrastructure. The bulkhead wharves along the Embarcadero are also at significant seismic risk, as well as some of the aging structures in Fisherman's Wharf. And then there, as you go south from the Bay Bridge, is a little less seismic risk, except for a couple hot spots, but really concentrated around the ferry building area at the foot of downtown. Here's the equivalent flood analysis. So again, kind of low points around the ferry building area, where you would see flooding coming in even today in some of the higher tides with storms. And then, when you get to 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise, you'll see kind of flooding along the entirety of the Embarcadero. And this can be, intermittent as there are storms and high tides. It's not constant, but enough to create disruption and damages to infrastructure. And this is what we're dealing with and trying to address. And so one of the first steps was to sort of identify what the types of measures that could be considered to address these hazard issues. So here's a sort of set of seismic measures that could be used: buttressing, drilling shafts and the like. These inform our Embarcadero early projects, and here are some of the draft flood improvements. And this is everything from flood defense structures to more green ecological features like living shorelines and other habitat structures. I'm going to talk briefly about the Embarcadero early projects. This is coming out of our engineering team. And here's just some examples of the project types. These projects were identified as things that could happen in the near term before, a sort of wholesale comprehensive adaptation project would take place to kind of seismically strengthen some of the more vulnerable assets today. So these include retrofits of the bulkhead wharves and buildings, seawall and shoreline strengthening, and disaster response improvements. Here's the full list of 23 projects that were identified, early projects that were identified. The ones in blue are moving through a sort of pre-design stage through using the Prop A bond money, and we'll be moving through kind of pre-design and environmental and engineering over the next couple of years. And so there may be contracting opportunities associated with those. I don't believe we have our engineering team here, so they would be the ones to answer more detailed questions about the early projects. Here are a couple examples. This is the piers 24 to 28 and a half. This would retrofit the wharves and substructures and the seawall along these piers to reduce damages in the event of an earthquake. This is a more significant project along the ferry building that would improve earthquake safety and disaster response by strengthening the seawall and substructure along the ferry building area, and also could be designed to enhance flood protection and sea level rise adaptation, something that the future adaptation work could build on. And as I mentioned previously, ferry building was just repeatedly identified through the public engagement as one of the most important structures that people care the most about. And lastly, here's a project at Fisherman's Wharf. Wharf J9 is sort of a dilapidated structure in the Fisherman's Wharf that currently doesn't have activity or use. But it's an opportunity to revitalize it and provide a new wharf and bulkhead that would be stable for an earthquake, and that it could then be used and returned to active use and inform our other planning for the Fisherman's Wharf area, which has its own unique complexities. And here's a just very generalized schedule, high-level schedule of the Embarcadero early projects. So you can see, there's one that's a bit more of a sort of geographic strategy around how do we address kind of flooding and seismic in that Pier 19 to Pier 41 area. And then we have the 11 projects that were shown in blue going through pre-design, and then conceptual engineering and detailed engineering and construction. And this is a pretty generalized schedule, but these would be the first 11 that would move forward using the Bond A project funds. And I will turn next to the development of the waterfront-wide adaptation strategies, the other kind of significant effort going on right now. Again, here's the map. It's the port jurisdiction, but considering inland, and so invoking a lot of other assets, both public and private, implicating the SFPUC and the stormwater system, and MTA and the rails and everything. So it's really complex. We're dividing it into 3 different geographies because of distinctions from a geographic and a land use and a demographic perspective. So really thinking about the Embarcadero as a chunk, the Mission Creek and Mission Bay area, and then the Islayas Creek and the Bayview kind of more industrial area to the south. And we're working through a kind of 3-phase process to get to a locally preferred plan. And working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have a partnership with the Army Corps that is working towards a tentatively selected plan by next summer. That would be kind of go through a rigorous kind of evaluation of feasibility and environmental process that the Army Corps kind of process has that would then enable the potential, if it kind of met federal cost benefit thresholds, to gain significant funding for that project. So our current phase to get to LPP, we've divided into 3 phases: phase A, B, and C. The first one is focused on working with city agencies and other regional stakeholders to get to a 2 to 3 draft adaptation strategies for the entirety of the sort of port waterfront, as I showed. Then it would go out to the public in a sort of robust public engagement process to get to 1 preliminary preferred adaptation strategy. There would also be a sort of technical evaluation along a number of criteria. And then finally, phase C would get us to a locally preferred plan, would be our sort of final draft preferred adaptation strategy. And that we would seek endorsement from the Board of Supervisors and the Port Commission. It would still have to go through environmental review, refinement, etc. And I want to talk a little bit about what is the level of detail of this, because it's a very aggressive, robust schedule. And what we're focused on is sort of where the city draws the line of defense, what we call the line of defense, which is the highest point in the city's flood defense system. And then what is the adaptation zone? What is the area that you need to be able to get up to that line of defense to sort of change the grade or the elevation and connect back to the city or to the piers and wharves? And that's the sort of level of detail that we're talking. It's not going to be detailed design or engineering. It's not going to have surface or subsurface design. It's really kind of where do you locate the design of the line of defense? What are the implications of that on the city's systems? And here's an example of a sort of preliminary preferred plan that comes from a partnership that the city of Charleston had with the Army Corps, Charleston, South Carolina. And this is just an example of the level of detail that we're talking about. You can see the different colored lines there being the sort of the location of the line of defense that they've chosen there, different shades of green being different kind of ecological features or breakwaters, things like that. So this is really the level of detail we're talking about. It's not a site plan or engineering kind of level of detail. That would come in future phases. And I mentioned the partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. We'd be working towards these sort of different alternatives, what they call the National Economic Development Plan, or NED, which is sort of the one that sort of maximizes the cost benefit ratio that becomes into what they then call the tentatively selected plan. We would concurrently be working with them to develop a locally preferred plan. We'd be ideally aligning them as closely as possible so that what we cared about as a locality would be incorporated into the tentatively selected plan as well by mid-2023, and then that would go through a more detailed design and environmental review. And finally, I just want to end on this slide. We're also looking at kind of engineering with nature and how do we incorporate natural and nature-based solutions into kind of throughout any alternative that we have, and just looking at some inspiring examples from around the world here, things that have been built. For example, this seawall in Seattle, Washington, where salmon habitat was incorporated into the design of their new seawall so that salmon could come and spawn and actually return to Elliott Bay. And I think what I've heard is that it's been a great success. So there's just a little bit of inspiration as we move forward. And with that, I will turn it over to questions and answers.
Hi, so far we have no questions in the chat.
So if folks have questions, you can just put it in the chat. I'll read it out and answer it.
Adam, while we're waiting for questions, if there are any, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Carlos Colon. I will be the contract admin for this program. So if you have any questions about future contracts, you can contact me. And actually, what I'll do is I'll put my email address into the chat.
It looks like there is a question from Carlos Yanez there. Says, how can we best be a partner with the district to suggest cost-effective solutions? I think there will be, and Carlos Colon can speak more to this, contracting opportunities around, for example, the early projects and design and engineering that would presumably have sort of, best practices for kind of engineering and cost effectiveness associated with that. We also do kind of high level cost estimating associated with the programmatic adaptation strategies that will happen through the Army Corps process. Those will have to be kind of refined and made more detailed over time as that project moves forward.
Yeah, just to add, we don't have any announcements quite yet at this moment, but we will be making some information available regarding upcoming contracts at some point, either this summer or this fall.
And Carlos, those will be tied to the early projects, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Are there any other questions you can put in the chat about the program, about upcoming work or contracting opportunities? Okay, well, I think we must have covered everything then. Thanks for your attendance today. I think we can go ahead and close out unless there are any last second questions that anyone wants to ask. I'm not seeing anything. So thanks all for your time today and your attendance, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Bye, everyone.